Today's adventure, this has a steering box that leaks like a sieve. And so I have had steering boxes as part before. It's a real adventure with the ball bearings and a worm gear setup. But this one I'm going to try and fix the seal, the lower seal, in the car. So don't be afraid to try new things. So I've taken the pitman arm off underneath. Right there, you can see it. One pitman arm and nut. So I'll undo the nut. Then you have to pull off the arm with a special puller, which is right here. And the annoying thing is I had one. I loaned it to somebody and now I don't have one. So I had to buy this one. That's all very frustrating. I didn't label it apparently, and they forgot who owned it, and I forgot who I loaned it to. That's the trouble. So that seal up inside there is bad. Very bad. So I will try and get this arm out and see if I can get those seals out. And I've read that these steering boxes, this particular one, does not have a bearing inside. It has a sleeve, which is steel. And there's just a little bit of play in it. Not much, but that might be enough to cause a problem. So I'll be checking that too when I get it apart. So I've cracked the nuts loose, or the bolts, and they are tight. It's I'm guessing 150 foot-pounds, but I'll check what the torque is supposed to be. They were definitely hard to get undone. So I've scraped it and blown off the loose dirt. So now I will lift it and see if I can get the whole thing out. Here's my special puller I had to make, well, put together to get that bearing and seal out of the box. This is just a top shock washer that I ground down to fit the hole. Cleaned up the edges. It still did damage the bearing, but not irreparably. And it did have a bearing, which shows you can't believe everything you see on the interweb. It's not a steel shaft opening that's machined. It's an actual opening that takes roller bearing and cage. So I put this in to the box that way, up against the bearing. I had this on the bottom, along with this other shock washer and a nut. And I wound it up to pull it out. This is just 5/16 standard soft steel threaded rod. So this does have to be locked. These two have to be locked together, or when you turn it on the bottom, the whole shaft will turn from the load. And that's it, worked it out. And then once the seal and bearing were down against the bottom of the steering box, I took this, turned it around, like that, and then used this as a drift. So down it went, with the nuts wound together obviously. And then I put this wide shoulder nut on top, threaded it down, and then used that to drive it the last bit out. So it's that simple. So now I have to try and find a new bearing, because I imagine there's somewhere on there since the shaft has a very small amount of play, and 2 new seals. And that's a problem because the listings for this truck all have a smaller seal. So the fun begins, trying to find the seal in the bearing that actually fit this steering box. Back to the pitman arm problem. So I tried very hard to find a bearing for this, and to no avail. I did actually find one, and it was $6.85, which was dirt cheap. Wonderful, I thought, after much searching. Shipping, $68.90 or something. No, not going to do that. So even though there's a little bit of play in the pitman arm and the bearing, it is a very little bit of play. So I'm going to accept defeat, and if it needs further work in the future, I will buy a rebuild kit, or I'll find another steering box. In the meantime, the budget has been exceeded on this truck, so it's going back in. It's not that bad. And so this is what I'm going to do. And I'll put together my little compressor thing with the threaded stock and try and push the bearing back up in there and then push the seals in. By the way, I had lots of trouble finding this kit. Manufacturers with wrong dimensions for the bearing and seals, wrong cross references, the whole bit. But I went to Napa, ordered theirs. Looks like 7-142, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Or maybe it's the 877808. Don't know. Can't remember. But it's got 2 seals and an O-ring. I'll put those in. But first I have to get the bearing in there. So from the bottom side of the steering box, this is where this bearing has to go up. Like that. In case you want to try and find one, by the way, I'll leave the number. And I'll leave some of the various suppliers I found. But you can see that the bore is stepped. Largest, a little smaller, and then smaller again in there. And the smallest one is where the bearing goes. Fortunately, I can use my seal press, seal pounding tool. This has a shaft that goes with it. And I could drive it straight up this way, but I think that's a little risky. The first thing I'm going to try and do is to use a bolt and draw it in that way. So I'll lube everything up and set it up, see what happens. Everything's lined up, ready to go. It's pretty straight. It's a little bit off lower on the back side, so I'll be careful and see if it'll straighten out. And then up at the top, just have the threaded stock with a steel plate and a washer and a nut. And I'll use this nut to tighten it up. Hopefully it'll start pulling in properly. You can see it's leveled out the bearing, straightened that out, but it's pulling off to one side. So I'll tap that into the center. You gotta feel it, it's gotta go up smoothly. There we go. There, that should work. A little bit that way. You can see everything. It's all clear. And now to tighten some more. And I'll start tightening it up from the upside. It feels smooth. No resistance. It's not binding. There it is installed. Get some light on there. There. So there's a main seal. It's the thickest one, goes up top. It has 2 rings on it, inner and an outer seal. Then there's a dust seal, which is the one on the outside. Then there's a circlip. And that circlip is slightly rounded on one side and flat on the other. So it goes with the flat side towards the seal. Everything's in place. Now I'll see if I can get in the... I'll put some more oil on the seals, and then I'll try and slide in the pitman arm without ripping anything. This would be easier on the bench for sure. So I've put it all back together. I haven't tightened the nut on the pitman arm yet because I want to make sure it doesn't leak. And I find out I'm out of the correct power steering fluid. I've got power steering fluid that says it's a Ford spec, but I don't know which spec this is because I can't find it anywhere. So the interwebs, which have never lied to me once, maybe 6 or 7 times, say that it's type F ATF. So I've got some synthetic transmission fluid, but I don't really want to put that in. So I have a little further checking to do and get the right stuff. And then I'll find out if it's leaking or not. But the top is all together, tightened up down there, and the turns are lock to lock, about 3 3/4, and it's centered, so everything should be good that way. New seal on top, just a rubber O-ring, square-sided O-ring, and then tightened the bolts. And the doesn't seem to be much play in it, if any. So I think it's adjusted okay, dry. Get some fluid and see if it leaks, and then hopefully I can start this. When I took this Pitman arm out and removed the seals, dust seal was gone. Somebody put RTV in there. The main seal was leaking like crazy, and there were no shims. And everything I see says there should be 2 shims. So I went to town and bought these shims, 2 of them, and now I'm just filing them out because the shaft hole is too small and the outer diameter is too big. So that's the closest I could get. So it fits now, even though it's not a perfect circle. It doesn't stick out past the seal anymore, and you can see it's not sticking out past the dust seal, so that'll work. I have one more to do, so we'll see if I can get the main seal out without damaging it. If it gets too tricky, then it's going to stay where it is, and I'll put the shims on the other side. But there's supposed to be a shim on each side of the main seal, and then this fits on top of that, and then the circlip holds it all in place. So I just want to make sure it wasn't moving up and down and getting, wouldn't reach these splines anyway, but I just didn't want it moving up and down and twisting in the bore. So I got some shims. I've measured them, they're pretty close. There'll be a little bit of play there, but not a lot. And certainly it's not important, it's just to stop them having excess play in the bore. Moving on. Now that I have finished welding up the creeper whose sidearm fell off. The shims I got, the 2 of them make up about 45 thousandths of an inch, and it looks like that should be right on. It looks like the circlip should go in there nicely. So that's what I will try next. Not sure if you can see it, but the circlip is in. It's fully seated. 45 thousandths on the shims was actually pushing the limits, so I've had to hammer that in with a punch, but it does get in there, and you can tell because these tabs, if it's not fully seated, they're big enough that they crinkle the seal, the dust seal. So if it's perfectly round, the circlip is seated. Now to put it in and make sure it doesn't scrape on anything. That apparently is what it's supposed to look like. So I'll just let it sit. I filled it up with fluid. See if it leaks with no pressure. Just because. And then if it doesn't leak with pressure when I actually get the engine running, I will see if it leaks with pressure. Hopefully all is well. But that's it for now on that part. Next, the brake. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, or even notify, or any of the above, or all of the above. Thank you.